The marble floors of Monarch Financial shimmered beneath the morning light, reflecting the rigid perfectionism the institution prided itself on. People in sharp suits moved like clockwork, measured, indifferent, precise, and in the center of it all, standing quietly in line at the reception desk, was a woman in a plain beige coat, holding a slim leather folder. She wasn't loud, she wasn't disruptive. She stood with poise, eyes observant, posture dignified, as if she had nothing to prove but everything to offer. But none of that mattered to Preston Reed. Preston didn't see the folder. He didn't see the elegance tucked inside the simplicity of her appearance. He saw what he wanted to see. "Ma'am," he barked, stepping out from behind the counter, "I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the counter." Zora turned surprised. "I'm here to speak with a loan officer. I have an appointment." His eyes narrowed, scanning her face like it offended him. "You don't look like someone we typically do business with." The air chilled. Zora blinked slowly. "Excuse me, you heard me." He gestured toward the door. "This isn't the place for walk-ins, especially not ones without proper credentials. I have ID, I have documents, and I was invited here." She extended the folder slightly, her hand steady. He slapped it from her grasp. The sound cracked louder than it should have in such a polished room. Gasps fluttered across the lobby. Phones froze mid-scroll. Even the background hum of quiet conversations seemed to fall silent. And then it happened. Preston slapped her. Open palm, no hesitation, as if her presence was an offense, her voice a threat. The shock registered slowly. Zora didn't stagger, she didn't scream. She simply stood there, still centered, as two security guards approached. Not him, but her. "Ma'am," one of them said coldly, "we need you to step outside." She turned slowly. "I was assaulted." The second guard didn't flinch. "That's not how we saw it." No one stepped in. Not the woman standing behind her in line, not the teller who had watched the entire scene with parted lips, not the assistant manager pretending to type. Preston adjusted his cuffs, smiling faintly like he had won something. "You were warned," he said, smug. Zora bent slowly, retrieved her folder from the marble floor, and straightened up. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Is this how your bank handles new investors?" Preston scoffed. "You, an investor?" She did. "I've seen more credible applications from teenagers opening piggy bank accounts." Zora didn't respond. Not with words, but her eyes sharp, patient knowing rested on him like a promise. She was already memorizing the wallpaper, the carpet patterns, the nameplates on each desk. The way the assistant manager had quietly stepped into the back room, the way one guard's hand hovered over his belt as if she were dangerous. She allowed them to escort her out aloud. Because some storms don't shout before they arrive. They gather quietly, watching, waiting, preparing to rewrite everything. And as she stood just outside the grand glass doors of Monarch Financial, folder in hand, wind brushing gently across her cheek, Zora looked up at the logo with a gaze that pierced stone. They didn't know it yet, but they had just struck the wrong woman. Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one slap to reveal everything a company stands for, or everything it hides. And if you've ever felt invisible in a place built on prestige, if you've ever been pushed aside, dismissed, or silenced, then you know what's coming next. Stay with this story and share it with someone who needs to remember. Silence is not weakness, and dignity does not mean surrender. Zora didn't flinch as the security guards flanked her, one on each side, towering stone-faced hands, hovering just close enough to intimidate. She was the one who had been struck, and yet they acted as if she had thrown the first blow. The taller guard name tag reading H. Carson leaned toward her shoulder. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. You're causing a disruption." A disruption? She looked back through the glass doors of Monarch Financial. Preston was still inside now, casually leaning against the front desk like nothing had happened. No tension in his shoulders, no reprimand, no apology. The receptionist whispered something, eyes darting in Zora's direction, then quickly looked away. The world had moved on because the woman who got slapped wasn't wearing a suit. Zora turned toward Carson. "Is there a manager available? You can speak with our compliance officer," he replied. "After you leave the premises." She raised a brow. "So let me understand, you witnessed a man strike me, and instead of questioning him, you're escorting me out." The second guard shifted uncomfortably. His nameplate read R. Dorsey. He wouldn't meet her eye. "We're just following protocol," he mumbled. "What protocol covers letting assault go unanswered?" she asked, voice quiet but slicing. Preston stepped outside, then casually holding a clipboard. Is she still out here? He asked, as if she were an unattended bag. Not a human being. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Carson's hand now touched her elbow. Not tight, but firm, a signal. Don't touch me, she said, not a threat, a boundary. Carson froze. Zora exhaled slowly. I'll walk, not because I'm guilty, but because I won't let this place stain who I am. She turned, took 2 steps, then paused, and the entire entrance lobby inside and out seemed to hold its breath. Just know, she added, her voice steady, the silence in this moment is yours, but the echo later will be mine. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to plead, because her presence alone unsettled something they hadn't yet defined: dignity that refused to kneel. Behind her, Preston scoffed under his breath. Typical, Carson murmured. Keep walking. But Zora wasn't just walking away. She was walking through them, through prejudice, dressed in policy, through hierarchy wrapped in false authority, through the illusion that those with polished shoes always have clean hands. She passed the brass handles of the main doors and stepped back into the street where morning traffic buzzed on unaware. But before she reached the sidewalk, a woman, older, white-haired, trembling, rushed up behind her. I saw what happened, she whispered. That man, he hit you. I recorded it. Zora turned to her eyes, calm but curious. You did? She nodded, holding up her phone. I didn't know what to do, but someone needed to. Zora met her gaze. You did exactly what was needed. And as she walked away this time, she knew there were cracks in the walls now. Tiny ones. But enough for truth to start slipping through. Zora sat on the edge of the concrete planter just outside the bank's grand entrance, her folder resting neatly on her lap, though now creased and slightly damp from its fall. The bustling city moved around her. Horns blared, heels clicked. Voices rose and fell. But she was still, not frozen, not broken, just deliberate. The slap, the stares, the silent betrayal by policy and protocol. It all played on a loop behind her eyes. But she didn't let it rattle her surface. Years ago, she might have shouted, might have demanded someone see her, hear her, recognize her worth. But now she didn't need validation. She was validation. The elderly woman who had filmed the encounter lingered nearby. Uncertain, should I call someone? A lawyer, maybe? That wasn't right, the way they treated you. Zora looked up at her gently. Thank you for standing in truth. That matters more than you know. The woman hesitated. If it were me, I'd sue. Zora almost smiled. There are many ways to hold people accountable, and sometimes the most effective way is quiet. She stood smoothing her coat. Her phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. Confirm Preston's record matches our complaint. History awaiting your signal. JM Internal Compliance Lead. Timberlake Financial. Zora tucked the phone back into her pocket. No need to reply, not yet. She glanced once more at the building behind her, its pristine glass gold signage, and security guards now pacing like nothing had happened. They thought it was over. They thought she was gone. But she wasn't just walking away to lick wounds. She was stepping back to gain perspective. Because Zora Timberlake wasn't just a visitor. She was the woman who owned the holding company that had acquired Monarch Financial just 2 months prior. She had signed the acquisition papers herself, but she hadn't walked in with a camera crew or press announcement. She had walked in with intention, with questions, because numbers looked good on paper. But culture lived in the shadows, and what she had witnessed today was a culture that punished difference, protected entitlement, and erased humanity. She wasn't surprised. She was just done giving warnings. She crossed the street and entered the cafe across from the bank, slipping into a quiet corner by the window. Ordered chamomile. Sat down, then she opened her laptop, logged into the secure server, and began typing her notes. Preston Reed, front desk manager. Immediate suspension recommended. Security Carson Dorsey, retraining or removal pending internal review. Incident time code synced with surveillance, plus witness video. She paused, then wrote the final line. Systemic rot is never in the numbers. It's in the unchecked power of those who think no one is watching. Zora closed the file, took a sip of her tea, and watched the bank from the window. Not with bitterness, not with rage, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what was about to come. The sun dipped behind the skyline as Zora entered her penthouse suite, glass walls stretching wide over the city that once overlooked her. She removed her coat with slow precision, as if shedding the day's residue, and set it gently on the armrest of a minimalist leather chair. Her assistant Jonah was already waiting inside a digital tablet in hand and eyes full of questions. "Ma'am," he greeted softly. "The footage from the bank has been archived. Multiple angles. Internal camera feed confirms everything. We also have the elderly witnesses recording. It's already backed up." Zora nodded once, impressed and read, "Disciplinary issues confirmed at 2 prior branches. Complaints quietly closed." "There's a pattern." Zora moved toward the floor-to-ceiling window, her heels silent on the marble. Below Monarch Financial's flagship branch still glowed with sterile prestige, unaware that its fate had already shifted hours ago. "They treated me like a threat," she said quietly. Jonah looked down. "I know they treated my presence," she continued, "as something that needed to be removed." She turned the voice steady, "Which is exactly why I had to go in as a stranger." For months, Timberlake Financial had been preparing to absorb the failing but well-connected Monarch chain. On paper, it was a strategic acquisition, a chance to modernize an outdated structure and expand market share. But for Zora, it was personal. Monarch was the bank that had denied her grandmother a business loan twice despite perfect credit. The bank that had redlined neighborhoods under the guise of risk mitigation. The bank that had offered smiles and handshakes in public and silently erected barriers behind closed doors. So when the board asked who would lead the quiet audit post-acquisition, Zora didn't delegate, she volunteered. Not as CEO, not as power in heels, but as a woman they wouldn't notice. A black woman in simple clothing, no title, no fanfare, just eyes, ears, and a sharp memory. She didn't want to read reports. She wanted to feel the culture. And now she had. Jonah took a step closer. "The board is ready for your statement. I've scheduled the press release for noon tomorrow, unless you want to address the staff first." "I'll handle it myself," she said. In person, he hesitated. "You're sure you want to be the face of this?" Zora turned fully, eyes burning, not with rage, but with focus honed by a lifetime of earned restraint. "I've hidden long enough. Let them see exactly who's been walking their hallways." She walked past him, heading for her home office. But at the door, she paused. "This isn't just about one branch, Jonah," she said. "This is about every place that thinks professionalism is a mirror, and that power only looks like them." Then she disappeared into the room, the door clicking shut behind her with finality. And for the first time in its history, Monarch Financial stood on the edge of a transformation, not driven by profit, but by reckoning. Late into the evening, Zora sat alone in her home office, a dim lamp casting soft golden light across mahogany shelves and carefully framed photographs. Among them was a black and white portrait of a woman in her early 50s. Head-high smile, resilient hands, rough from labor, but posed with pride. Her grandmother, Esther James Zora, picked up the photo, brushed her thumb gently along its edge and whispered, "We're almost there." Decades ago, this woman had walked into the very same branch of Monarch Financial not once but 3 times, requesting a modest business loan to expand her home-based sewing shop into a real storefront. She had the credit, she had the receipts, she had the demand. What she didn't have was the right zip code or the right skin color. They smiled at her, handed her brochures, asked her to wait patiently, and in the end they handed her nothing. Esther went home that day and sewed for 12 hours straight, in silence. She never spoke ill of the bank, but her eyes told a different story. Zora remembered that silence more than anything. Not bitter, not broken, just resolved. That memory lived in Zora's bones. It had shaped her understanding of the world, how gates weren't just built of iron, but of assumptions, how doors didn't need locks when guarded by polite rejection. So when the acquisition proposal landed on her desk, Monarch Financial's assets listed its valuation, lowered its vulnerabilities exposed. Zora had seen more than a business opportunity. She saw a door creaking open, a door her grandmother had once stood outside clutching a folder just like hers, only to be turned away with a smile and a, "We'll call you." Zora had run the analysis herself, and she noticed something chilling. That same branch, the one on Edison Boulevard, still had one of the lowest minority approval rates for small business loans in the region. No formal complaints, no smoking gun. Just statistics that whispered the truth louder than any headline. Same building, same practices, new wallpaper. She couldn't fix what she didn't face, so she had faced it in the same modest shoes her grandmother once wore, in the same spirit of quiet strength. And now she would make sure that no other young girl would have to grow up watching a woman they loved get politely denied dignity. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from the Timberlake Foundation. Community Reinvestment Program ready to launch. Your directive approved $10 million allocated to women and minority-owned businesses, priority given to those previously denied by Monarch. Zora closed her eyes briefly, breathing in that moment. Not revenge, restoration. She stood and returned the photo to its place beside her own graduation picture, beside the first dollar earned from her own venture, beside a simple plaque that read, "You belong in every room they said you didn't." And tomorrow she would walk back into Monarch, not as a test subject, but as the author of a new chapter. One her grandmother would have been proud to read. The morning after the incident, Zora sat in the backseat of her town car, headed not to a boardroom, but to a nondescript brick building that housed one of her company's internal ethics teams. Dressed once again in neutral tones, she watched the city drift by, storefronts, street vendors, commuters moving like a tide of routine and resignation. Jonah sat beside her, scrolling through updates on a tablet. "There's pressure to release a public statement," he said. "The footage is already spreading on social media. People are guessing who you are." Zora didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked out the window and whispered, "And yet none of them at the bank guessed." "Even when I stood right in front of them," Jonah set the tablet down. "You could have walked in on day one with your title, your security detail, your designer heels. Preston would have been polishing your shoes." "That's exactly the problem," she said quietly. He waited. And then she explained, not for the first time, but as if saying it out loud gave it new gravity. "When people know who you are, they perform. They smile wider, they stand straighter. They say all the right things, not because it's who they are, but because they know they're being watched." She paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "But when they don't know who you are, that's when the truth comes out." She thought back to the first day she entered Monarch's lobby in thrift store flats, in a coat 2 seasons out of style. She had timed it so she arrived just after rush hour when foot traffic was low and staff grew less polished. No one offered her water. No one greeted her with the firm tone reserved for potential investors. Instead, they pointed her toward an ATM. That moment told her more than any audit ever could. I needed to see what it felt like she continued to be them. The ones who walk in with questions and walk out with nothing. She turned to Jonah now, her gaze clear. "If I had walked in as CEO, I'd have seen policies. As a stranger, I saw character." Jonah exhaled. "So what's next? Do we name names? Fire them all?" She shook her head. "No, not yet. First, we make the system see itself, not through memos or rebrands, but through a mirror." "And what will they see?" he asked. Zora looked ahead as the car slowed at a red light. "They'll see how easy it was to disregard someone they thought didn't matter." She leaned back against the seat, folding her hands. "Power isn't just the ability to change things," she said. "It's the willingness to disappear long enough to understand why change is needed." Outside the building loomed a modest space filled with files, data, and testimonies. But inside the car sat a woman who had walked through a storm of dismissal with her head high, not to prove who she was, but to reveal who they were. That evening, the lights inside Zora's townhouse were low, warm. The city hummed faintly outside the tall windows. But in here, it was just quiet enough for truth to breathe. On the couch sat her 12-year-old son, Isaiah, legs tucked under him, eyes still wide from the video he'd just seen on the tablet. The slap, the silence, his mother calm as stone, refusing to lower her gaze. He looked up at her now, brow furrowed. "Why didn't you say something right away, Mom? You could have told them who you were. They would have stopped." Zora sat beside him, brushing a hand gently through his curls. "I know. Baby, I could have. And part of me wanted to." "Then why didn't you?" he asked, voice cracking slightly. "He hit you in front of everyone," she nodded slowly. "Yes, and it hurt. Not just the slap, but the way no one said anything. Like I didn't matter." His eyes lowered. "You do matter." "I know I do," she said softly, "but what I needed to see, Isaiah, was who else believed that." Without being told, without being warned, he stayed quiet, processing. She continued, her tone calm but filled with weight. "If I had shouted, 'I'm the CEO,' they would have backed off, but not because they respected me as a person, only because they feared my title." He looked at her again. "So you wanted them to show who they really are?" "Yes," she whispered. "Because one day you'll walk into places where people won't know your name. They won't know your degrees, or your heart, or your brilliance. All they'll see is the part of you they've been taught to underestimate." She cupped his chin gently. "And I need you to remember, you are not small, just because they treat you that way." Isaiah blinked quickly, trying to hold in tears. She pulled him into her arms. "This world won't always clap for your presence," she said into his hair. "So sometimes you walk in quietly. You watch, you learn, and then when it matters most, you speak with truth so loud they have to listen." They sat like that for a while. Mother and son's strength passed down not in anger, but in understanding. Then he asked softly, "Are you going to fire them?" She leaned back and met his eyes. "I'm going to do what they never expected. I'm going to lead, and I'll decide who deserves a second chance and who doesn't." He nodded slowly. "They won't forget you." She smiled. They were never supposed to. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one like a slow dawn over a city about to learn the name of the woman it thought it could silence. The next morning, Zora stood in front of her full-length mirror, slipping on a navy cardigan over a faded cream blouse. No jewelry, no designer bag, just a plain leather purse with scuffed corners and a folder tucked carefully inside. Her pants were well worn but pressed her shoes, practical, not polished. She looked like someone saving every cent, someone who had questions but no leverage, someone they wouldn't see. Perfect. She tied her hair into a low, loose bun and glanced at her reflection. Not with vanity, but with strategy. It wasn't a disguise. It was access, the version of herself that banks judged before they listened. Downstairs, her driver opened the door to a modest sedan, not her usual town car, and by 9:15 a.m., she was standing outside Monarch Financial's main branch, again folder in hand, just another woman in the city with errands to run. The glass doors whooshed open and cool, filtered air greeted her like a line of defense. The marble floors stretched ahead, the gold-accented signage pristine as ever. The same receptionist sat behind the desk, glancing up briefly before returning to her screen. Zora walked slowly toward the counter. No eye contact, no greeting. After a moment, she cleared her throat gently. "Good morning." The receptionist's name tag, reading Megan, glanced up, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, I'm here to ask about opening a business account," Zora said. "I'm looking to grow a small venture, and I'd like to speak with someone about next steps." Megan tapped her keyboard. "Do you have an appointment?" But I was told I could speak with someone today, perhaps a business advisor." Megan sighed barely, but it was there. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing vaguely to the leather chairs near the potted plant by the entrance. "Someone will be with you." Zora sat and waited. 15 minutes passed, no call, no approach. A man in a navy blazer entered, greeted Megan with warmth, and was escorted directly inside after 2 minutes. Another woman carrying a high-end tote bag received a fresh cappuccino while she waited Zora. Still invisible, after 30 more minutes, a young man in a tight-fitting button-down shirt walked over Aiden. His name tag said, "You need help?" he asked, already glancing at his smartwatch. Zora stood. "I'm hoping to speak with someone about opening a business account. I have my information here." She handed over the folder. Aiden opened it halfway, barely looked. "Have you checked our website?" "I'd prefer to talk to someone in person," she said evenly. He forced a short laugh. "Most of that info's online now." "What's your business anyway?" "Education consulting," she replied. He raised an eyebrow. "You tutor kids?" "I advise institutions on curriculum and policy for underserved communities." Aiden nodded, unimpressed. "We don't really have anything tailored for that kind of niche, but I can give you a pamphlet." Zora stood still, calm. "And the business team, they're really backed up right now. Maybe try again next week." Next week, that was the door they gave people like her. No rejection, no, just delay, just enough friction to make you turn around quietly, just enough sugar to keep the bias sweet. Zora smiled faintly. "Thank you, Aiden." He blinked. "You're welcome." She turned and walked slowly toward the door, but her mind was already writing the report. Test 1, unannounced visit. Modest appearance, result dismissed. No offer for formal assistance, no review of documentation, no invitation to follow up. And as the doors opened before her once more, she didn't feel small. She felt certain the system was exactly as broken as she remembered, and it had no idea she was here to fix it. Zora didn't leave right away. Instead, she stepped to the side of the lobby, pretending to skim a pamphlet near the potted fern, her eyes drifting just enough to observe what her words alone couldn't expose. Not 3 minutes after she'd been dismissed, the glass doors opened again, and in walked a man in his late 30s, crisp navy suit, Oxford shoes that gleamed. His hair was styled with precision, and he carried a brown leather briefcase that likely cost more than some people's monthly rent. He smiled casually at Megan, the same receptionist who hadn't even offered Zora a seat near the business desk. But now Megan straightened. Her voice lifted. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Monarch. What can we help you with today?" Zora tilted her head, listening. The man replied, "Just wanted to see about business accounts. Nothing fancy, just getting something set up before I meet my accountant later." "No problem at all," Megan chirped. "We'll have one of our advisors meet you right away. Can I offer you some coffee while you wait?" The man chuckled. "You know what? Sure, Black, no sugar." "Coming? Right up." Zora's fingers tightened slightly around the pamphlet. No appointment, no credentials shown, no folder presented. And yet, the doors flew open for him. Moments later, a sleekly dressed advisor emerged from the hallway, hand extended, smile wide. "Mr. Dalton, so glad you stopped by. Let's get you into our business suite. We've got a few premium packages that might interest you." Mr. Dalton smiled, charmed. Lead the way. Zora watched them walk past the very chairs she had been told to wait in. Unchanged, untouched, the room hadn't changed. Only the person in it had. She stood still and visible once more, but this time she didn't just record it in her memory. She raised her phone slightly and snapped a discreet photo. Dalton being led away. Megan smiling in the background, her own pamphlet still in hand. Data, not emotion, because one story could be dismissed as exaggeration, but patterns. Patterns painted the truth with permanent ink. Her thoughts wandered briefly to her grandmother again. How many Daltons had walked into this place over the decades? How many Esthers had walked out, folder untouched? She returned the pamphlet to its stand and took one final glance at the room. A bank built on image, on performance, on selective warmth. They had no idea who she was, and that was exactly what made this moment honest. Tomorrow she'd return again. Different request, same version of herself, because justice she knew wasn't served in one visit. It was earned one undeniable contrast at a time. As Zora turned back toward the main floor, she didn't head straight for the exit. Instead, she stood quietly near the center desk, folder in hand once more. She made no scene, no demand. Just waited, hoping perhaps foolishly that someone would choose to see her. It was Aiden again who noticed her lingering presence. He strode over with a practiced smile, the kind crafted more for compliance than compassion. "Still here?" he asked, glancing briefly at the file she held. "Yes," Zora said evenly. "I was hoping to speak with someone more familiar with small business lending. I've brought documentation, financial statements, projections, if that helps move things forward." Aiden let out a small, polite sigh. Then he pointed. "To be honest, most of our clients get started over at the ATM or online kiosk. It walks you through our products, and you can even pre-qualify without speaking to anyone." Zora blinked. "I'm not asking to pre-qualify. I'm asking for a conversation." "Yes, I get that," he replied, still smiling. "But the kiosk will give you all the info you need. If something looks promising, maybe then we'll get you on a schedule. Though fair warning, our business advisors are pretty booked." Zora's hand tightened slightly on the folder. "So you're suggesting that before speaking to a human, I ask the ATM if I'm worthy of your time?" Aiden's smile faltered for a half second before returning. "It's just more efficient. You'd be surprised how many people use it." She held his gaze, now letting the silence fill the air between them. "I'm not here to withdraw cash," she said quietly. "I'm here to invest in a community, to build something, the kind of thing your branch should be supporting." Aiden's eyes darted toward the manager's office. "Look, it's nothing personal, it's just the process." Zora nodded slowly, the disappointment on her face no longer hidden, right? The process, and with that she stepped way toward the exit, past the ATM that glowed in the corner. Humming softly, a machine now standing in for empathy, for trust, for a chance. She paused beside him, watched a young man, white, fresh out of college by the look of him, tap his card and receive instant prompts about investment tiers, concierge service upgrades, and platinum perks. Zora tilted her head. Same machine, different conversation. She took a mental note, then walked out. But as the door closed behind her, she knew she wasn't leaving. Empty-handed, she was collecting stories, every word, every glance, every brush off, because what they dismissed as protocol, she saw as proof. Proof that not all barriers are brick. Some are polite, efficient, digitized, and deadly silent. Just as Zora reached the outer lobby, the familiar voice stopped her. "Excuse me, ma'am, Preston?" She turned slowly to face him. He stood with his arms crossed, gold name tag gleaming beneath the logo-embroidered blazer posture. radiating the kind of authority that didn't ask questions, it gave instructions. I was told you've been asking for access to our business services, he said, tone clipped, as if the very idea irritated him. Zora nodded. Yes, I've brought all necessary documents and asked to speak with someone. I was told to use the ATM. Preston gave a tight smile. Our staff are trained to follow procedures. We've had an uptick in unusual inquiries lately. Unusual? She asked, her voice low but steady. Is seeking financial guidance now considered suspicious? He ignored the challenge. Let me see your paperwork. She handed him the folder. Preston flipped it open with a deliberate slowness, barely skimming the contents. Tax IDs, business plan, summaries, early revenue statements, all legitimate, all neatly prepared. But Preston stopped midway through and looked up. There's no notarized income verification here. Zora blinked. That's not typically required at this stage. Well, he said coolly, that's how we do things here, especially for first-time walk-ins with incomplete documentation. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. So the documentation is now incomplete. For our purposes, yes, he said. We have a standard to maintain. She watched him close the folder and hand it back with a look that said, this ends here, but Zora didn't move. She met his gaze, letting the silence hang between them. Is that your professional opinion, she said calmly, or your personal judgment? Preston stiffened. Excuse me, because the man who walked in before me, she continued, offered no documents, no appointment, and was ushered into a meeting within 3 minutes. Preston's jaw flexed. Are you accusing this institution of favoritism? I'm asking if you're aware that equity is not the same as efficiency. He chuckled once. Ma'am, if you're uncomfortable with our process, you're welcome to take your business elsewhere. She tilted her head, studying him, not with anger, but with clarity. And then she said slowly, you may want to remember this moment. Is that a threat? He asked, eyes narrowing. No, Zora replied. It's a reminder that you're speaking to someone who keeps records, not just of transactions, but of how people treat strangers. Preston didn't reply. He straightened his blazer, nodded sharply, and turned away. Zora walked back toward the exit, gripping her folder. Not because she was shaken, but because she had just confirmed what she came to learn. This place didn't deny people with bad credit. It denied people with the wrong face, and beneath its sleek brand image and platinum promises, Monarch Financial still ran on one quiet truth. Access wasn't earned, it was filtered. 3 days later, Zora stepped through the revolving doors of Monarch Financial once again. But this time she wasn't there to ask for help. She was there to test resolve. Her appearance was still modest. Navy blazer over a simple blouse, slacks, pressed heels low, but there was something different in her stance. She walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had given the system its chance to show fairness and was now documenting the final page of its report. In her hand, a black leather portfolio, heavy with data, business statements, certified verifications, investor background, incorporation, documents, projected growth over 3 years. Every number triple-checked, every signature authenticated. She approached the counter calmly. Megan, the receptionist, glanced up, expression blank, though Zora caught a flicker of recognition. Yes, Megan said, tone more cautious than before. I'm here to speak with a business investment advisor. I have all necessary documents, and I'd like to discuss account structuring and capital placement options. Megan blinked. The phrasing wasn't casual. It was precise language of someone who knew more than she let on. Do you have an appointment? No. But I'd appreciate being connected with someone capable of discussing mid-level institutional planning, preferably someone with decision-making clearance. Megan paused longer than expected, then finally nodded. Please wait a moment. Zora took a seat. The waiting area was still the same clean lines, glass partitions, soft jazz humming beneath the artificial calm. But she wasn't the same. Not anymore. She watched employees move past her, some avoiding eye contact. Preston was nowhere in sight. That was good. His absence was in itself a signal. Maybe someone had whispered. Maybe her presence lingered longer than expected. 15 minutes passed, then 20. And finally a woman appeared, Vivian Burke, mid-40s, expensive haircut, clipboard in hand, heels echoing like authority. Miss James, Zora replied, offering the alias she had used on official documents. Vivian offered a tight, professional smile. I'm Director Burke. Let's step into one of our private offices. Zora followed her into a frost glass room furnished in deep blues and brushed metal. A small pitcher of water and 2 glasses sat on the table untouched, ornamental. Vivian gestured to a seat. "You mentioned institutional planning?" Zora nodded and slid the folder across the table. "My firm is looking to open a segregated account to support educational outreach programs in underserved districts. We're also evaluating potential high-yield vehicles for passive growth. But we need a partner bank that understands long-term vision, not just short-term security." Vivian opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the documents. Real documents. Registered EIN. Partnership structures. Even a letter of interest from a philanthropic trust with 7 figures in reserves. All legitimate, all undeniable. Yet still Vivian hesitated. Zora watched her carefully. She wasn't looking at the numbers. She was looking for a reason not to believe them. Vivian cleared her throat. "These documents are impressive, but before we proceed, we'll need to run a thorough background check and possibly request a liquidity audit." Zora didn't flinch. "That won't be a problem. I'd simply ask that your institution applies the same standards to all clients with similar asset profiles." Vivian nodded slowly, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "We always do." Zora leaned back, her voice calm. "Do you?" Vivian said nothing, and in that quiet pause, Zora understood everything. This wasn't about her credentials, it never had been. It was about comfort, who made these halls feel safe and who made them feel challenged. She stood gathering her folder. "I'll return once your team's had time to review. But I'll leave you with this. How you treat someone when you think they have nothing is the clearest reflection of your institution's worth." She left Vivian speechless. And as she exited the office head high, Zora knew the test wasn't just about approval. It was about awakening. 3 business days had passed. No call, no email, no follow-up. Zora checked the contact card Vivian had handed her. 2 phone lines, a direct email, a LinkedIn QR code. She had used none of them. Not because she was waiting helplessly, but because she wanted to give the system every chance to act with integrity without a push it hadn't. So on the 4th day she returned. Same outfit, same name, same firm smile. Megan looked up as she entered, surprise flickering behind her neutral mask. Zora approached calmly. "I'd like to speak with Director Burke. She was reviewing documents I submitted earlier this week." Megan hesitated, tapping at her keyboard. Yes, I believe she's in today." "Let me check." 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, a junior assistant, not Vivian, arrived at the desk, early 20s, still unsure in her blazer. "Ms. James?" she asked. "Yes. Ms. Burke asked me to let you know that your application is still under review." "There were some delays on the verification end." Zora tilted her head. "What kind of delays? I'm not sure. Compliance matters." I think Zora kept her voice steady. "I submitted all certified documentation fully verified. Nothing should require more than 48 hours for basic due diligence." The assistant offered a weak smile. "I'm just relaying the message I see," Zora said. She waited a beat, then asked softly, "Would Ms. Burke be willing to speak with me directly?" The assistant's smile faltered. "She's in a meeting right now." "Of course she was," Zora nodded slowly. "Very well." She stepped aside and walked back to the same leather chair near the lobby's edge, the one she was growing far too familiar with. She sat in silence, observing again. A man, white mid-40s, casual suit entered. Moments later. No appointment, no folder, no wait. Within 5 minutes, he was escorted to a consultation room. No delays, no compliance issues. Zora inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly through her nose. Second visit. Fully documented proposal, no progress. She pulled out a small notebook and scribbled a line. "When denial wears lipstick, it calls itself procedure." She had been here before, not just in this building, but in this exact dynamic, where politeness became a weapon, where courtesy concealed dismissal, where the phrase "we're still reviewing" translated to "we're hoping you go away." She stood and approached the desk again. "Megan," she said gently. "Yes, when the compliance team finishes their review, would you kindly ensure I receive an email? One that confirms the outcome in writing?" Megan nodded slowly. "Yes, I can do that. Thank you. I'll wait to see whether this branch is as thorough with truth as it claims to be, with paper." And with that, Zora walked out once more. No raised voice, no dramatic exit, just steps full of calm that whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, Zora received a voicemail. "Miss James," the voice began, formal, rehearsed, and unmistakably Preston. "We've reviewed your submission and require additional verification before proceeding. Please return to the branch with the requested items. Click. No warmth, no apology for delay, just another demand wrapped in neutrality. By noon, she was back at Monarch Financial, folder in hand, expression unreadable. Preston was waiting near the reception desk, arms crossed, a faint, smug tilt to his jaw. Megan stepped aside as he approached Miss James, he said, without offering his hand. Thank you for returning. I came for clarity, Zora replied. You said you needed more documents. Yes, Preston said. We're going to need a notarized letter of business intent, a third-party appraisal of your projected growth, and a reference from a corporate sponsor. Zora blinked once. That's not listed in your standard business account requirements, she said evenly. It's something we require in certain cases, he replied, for clients without established financial footprints. Zora let the silence stretch. Mr. Reed, she said carefully, my documentation includes IRS registration, 3/4 of revenue letters of incorporation, and proof of institutional backing. That is a financial footprint. Preston didn't budge. Still, the committee has asked for more, especially when we're dealing with high-risk applicants. There it was, high risk. The label that said everything without saying anything at all. Out of curiosity, Zora asked how many other applicants this month were asked for those 3 items. Preston hesitated just long enough to confirm what she already knew. She held his gaze, and how many of them were referred to the business suite within 10 minutes. Mistakes happen, he said stiffly, but we're only trying to protect the institution. Zora's tone didn't rise, it sank low, steady, deliberate. Is the institution at risk? From people like me? Preston's jaw clenched. That's not what I said. No, she replied, but it's what you meant. She slowly gathered the folder, tucking it back under her arm. I'll return, she said with the documents you requested. But make sure you're clear. This isn't compliance, it's obstruction. Then she turned to walking out once again, not defeated, but sharper. Sharper than a signature. Sharper than any policy built to bend around privilege. Because Zora now knew the shape of the wall they were building, and brick by brick, she was naming every piece. Zora returned the following day, documents in hand, freshly notarized, referenced, and bound. She wasn't angry, she was exact, Vivian. Burke greeted her this time, the director's smile thin and tight like a thread pulled taut across her face. Ms. James, she began, thank you for coming back on such short notice. Zora handed over the portfolio with grace. Every item you requested is inside. I trust that fulfills your requirements. Vivian didn't open the folder. She placed it neatly on the table between them, as if proximity alone would be enough. Yes, she said, I'll be honest with you. We're just exercising in caution. I'm sure you understand. Zora leaned forward, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. I do understand. What I don't understand is why that caution seems reserved for clients who look like me. Vivian blinked, caught off guard by the directness. I've now visited this branch 4 times. I've watched 3 white male clients walk in without appointments, offer less paperwork than I did, and be escorted to private rooms within minutes. She held Vivian's gaze, and yet, I've been asked each time for just a little more, just enough to stall, just enough to hope I'd give up. Vivian's face remained professional, but her fingers twitched against her pen. That's not intentional, she said. We follow procedures. Zora smiled, not with warmth, but with knowing. You follow comfort, and when someone doesn't fit the image of low risk, you build a wall out of policy. She sat back. But here's the part you're not ready for. I know your policy. I've read your underwriting guidelines. I've trained teams on equity compliance. I've funded businesses larger than this entire branch's portfolio. Vivian opened her mouth, but Zora raised a hand, graceful silencing. I didn't come here to beg for approval. I came to measure your honesty. Vivian's voice softened. I assure you, Ms. James, this isn't about race. Zora didn't flinch. That sentence, she said quietly, has never once been spoken after fair treatment. The room fell still. No defense, no denial, just the quiet panic of someone suddenly aware that they had underestimated the wrong woman. Zora reached for her folder and stood. I'll take this back for now, she said. I wouldn't want to burden your review team further. Vivian hesitated. You're choosing to withdraw. Zora paused in the doorway, her profile lit by the midday sun flooding through the frosted glass. No, she replied. I'm choosing to observe a little longer. Some truths need space to finish revealing themselves. Then she left. Leaving behind more than documents, she left a mirror. And Vivian? She finally saw what stared back, but it was already too late. Zora returned one final time, same posture, same presence, but a different tone in her voice. This wasn't a visit born from hope. It was a test designed with purpose. She approached the front desk where a new receptionist, Anna, greeted her. Younger, fresher, maybe unaware of the history that had already stained the carpet beneath her feet. "Good morning," Zora said, voice smooth as silk over steel. "I'm here to inquire about a business loan." Anna blinked, glancing at her monitor. "Do you have an account with us already?" "I don't, but I'm considering opening one. I've already spoken with several of your advisors, submitted prior documents, and I'm prepared to provide a full financial portfolio today." Anna's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I see. I'll check if someone is available," Zora nodded, stepping back slightly, folding her hands in front of her. She didn't sit this time, she stood anchored. After a few minutes, she was ushered back into a room. This time it wasn't Vivian, it was Preston. He had returned, same name tag, same faint cologne. But his eyes weren't smug now. They were guarded like a man unsure whether the ground under him was solid or made of glass. "Miss James," he said, "loan consultation, is that right?" "That's correct," she replied, handing him a new folder. "The documents include my business income projected growth, debt-to-income ratio, cash flow, and requested loan terms." He sat slowly, began flipping through the folder. It was flawless. Numbers aligned, collateral a documented business plan. Airtight. But Preston didn't lean in. He leaned back. "Well," he said, "we don't usually see this level of organization from sole proprietors." Zora didn't blink. "Is that a compliment or a concern?" He hesitated. "It's just unusual, Joe." There it was again. That word, would it be more usual? She asked if my paperwork were sloppy or if my skin were a few shades lighter. He stiffened. "Let's keep this professional, EM," she said. "All right," he replied, regrouping. "Based on your request, we need to run a background check, a credit risk analysis, and I've included all of that in Appendix C," she said. He opened to it, read it, swallowed. "Still," he said, flipping the folder shut too quickly, "we typically require additional time to review large sum loan requests, especially with newer clients." "And how long does that review usually take?" 2 to 3 weeks. Zora stared at him. "In your files, Mr. Reed, there's a man named Jason Trent. He applied for a loan for a startup brewery, submitted fewer documents than I just handed you, and received pre-approval in 48 hours. I know this because I funded his expansion 6 months later." Preston froze. "You read our internal loan records?" he asked, barely hiding the alarm. Zora tilted her head. "I don't need to read them. I own the institution that acquired your portfolio." He said nothing, couldn't. She leaned in slightly, her voice like velvet, wrapping a blade. "You just told the CEO of Timberlake Financial that she's unusual, and then treated her request like a risk." Preston's throat tightened. But Zora wasn't finished. "I've asked, waited, followed every procedure you've designed to hold people like me back, and now I'm simply measuring the length of your resistance." She stood, left the folder on the table. "I'll give you 48 hours to respond with a decision." Then she turned toward the door. And as she walked away, Preston was left holding the weight of every excuse he'd ever thought sounded professional, now exposed for what it truly was. Fear. 48 hours passed, not a word. No email, no call, no written explanation. But Zora didn't wait in silence. She returned same composure, same folder, same exacting precision. When she stepped into the lobby, this time the atmosphere shifted. Subtle but real. Megan, back at reception, straightened slightly when she saw her. Whispers passed behind glass walls. Someone moved a stack of files that didn't need moving. The branch had started to sense her presence now, like a tremor before an earthquake. And yet, nothing had changed. Zora was led into a smaller consultation room than before. No coffee this time, no smile, just a manila envelope resting on the desk. Preston walked in 5 minutes later. Posture, stiff folder in hand. "We've reviewed your application," he said, offering the envelope with deliberate calm. "Unfortunately, at this time, we're unable to proceed with your loan request due to insufficient institutional relationship history." Zora opened the envelope. Inside was a single-page rejection letter, generic templated, with blank fields awkwardly filled in. The kind of letter designed to say everything and nothing at once. She looked up at him. "You're denying a fully qualified application because I haven't been your customer long enough." Preston shifted. "That's the standard. For loans of this magnitude, we prefer established clients." "And Jason Trent," she asked, voice calm but cutting, "he received a loan in under 2 days with no prior account. In fact, I was the one who personally advised him to open with Monarch. Preston avoided her eyes. She leaned forward, placing the rejection letter flat on the table between them. "This isn't a decision," she said. "It's a mask." He flinched slightly. "You've delayed, deflected, and now delivered a one-page rejection that wouldn't pass scrutiny in a high school business class." "Miss James, no," she said softly but firmly. "We're done pretending this is about policy." Preston opened his mouth, closed it again. Zora gathered the rejection letter, slowly folded it, and placed it neatly back into its envelope. Then she stood facing him fully. "This letter will be very useful," she said, "but not for the reasons you think." He frowned. "Useful how, as evidence," she replied, "that despite your company being under new ownership, some of its worst habits never left." She stepped toward the door, then turned back. "One last time, I gave this branch a choice to rise, to evolve, to recognize potential over prejudice." She let the silence breathe before adding, "You chose paper over people," and then she walked out, leaving Preston alone with a single sheet of paper that suddenly felt heavier than the marble floors beneath him. Zora stepped out of the room with the kind of grace that didn't need an audience. No slammed door, no final look over the shoulder, just the calm, precise movements of a woman who had gathered everything she needed and left behind the rest. As she walked through the main lobby, heads turned, not in greeting but in recognition. Something had shifted. Staff who once ignored her and now lowered their eyes. Megan sat frozen behind the desk, lips pressed tight. Even Aiden, standing near a printer with a stack of brochures, suddenly looked as though he'd forgotten what his hands were for. Zora didn't break stride. She didn't need to. The air around her carried the weight of truth and the tension of exposure. She passed by the ATM that had once been offered to her as a substitute for human conversation. Its screen now blinked gently, offering promotions to no one. A hollow gesture. She reached the glass doors and paused just long enough for the automatic sensors to react. The doors whispered open and a rush of city air met her face, cool, crisp, free. She stepped through them and never looked back. Inside, no one spoke for several seconds. It was Megan who finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who was she?" Preston didn't answer because he knew now. And for the first time in his carefully managed career, he understood that some exits don't end. A moment they define it, Zora's departure didn't feel like a client walking out. It felt like a verdict, and the building she left behind suddenly felt smaller. The boardroom on the 43rd floor of Timberlake Tower was a monument to legacy. Polished oak table, wall-length windows, sleek black chairs arranged in brutal symmetry. The city stretched out below like a chessboard, waiting to be played. The executives of Monarch Financial were seated in stiff suits and tighter expressions. Some had flown in, and others were summoned without notice. All had the same question quietly burning behind their eyes. Why were they here at precisely 9 a.m.? The side doors opened and Zora walked in. No assistant, no announcement, no theatrics, just presence. She wore a tailored dark blazer, her natural curls pulled back into a soft bun, minimal makeup, and an expression that could melt steel or build an empire depending on what the room deserved. A few of them stood awkwardly, unsure of the protocol. Others remained seated, not yet recognizing her. She walked to the head of the table, placed her folder down, and looked around the room. Some blinked, others shifted, but no one spoke. Until finally, one voice broke the silence. An older man near the center. "I'm sorry, but are you from legal or operations?" Zora smiled faintly. "I'm from ownership." The room fell into stunned stillness. "Allow me to reintroduce myself," she continued, tone firm, but without arrogance. "I'm Zora Timberlake, CEO of Timberlake Financial Parent Company, to Monarch Bank and Trust as of last quarter's acquisition." Mouths parted. One man coughed. Another whispered something to the person beside him, too late to matter. Zora opened her folder, pulled out several documents, and slid them forward. These are transcripts, timestamps, video, stills, and first-hand reports from a recent client experience audit conducted by me in person at your flagship branch on Edison Boulevard. A woman in glasses leaned forward, scanning the top sheet. Her face paled. Zora let that silence stretch before continuing. "I approached your staff as a first-time walk-in. I was dismissed, redirected to machines, spoken to with thinly veiled bias, and ultimately denied, despite exceeding every qualification in your own internal loan criteria." A man in a navy tie cleared his throat. "Miss Timberlake, I can assure you this was never the intent of our team." "No," Zora said, holding up a hand. No more assurances. Today isn't about apologies, it's about accountability. She took a slow breath. For too long, institutions like this one have believed professionalism can cover prejudice, that courtesy can conceal exclusion. Her eyes scanned the table. I didn't come here to shame you. I came here to show you yourselves. Then with calm precision, she laid down a single photograph on the center of the table, a still frame from the lobby camera. Zora, in her plain clothes folder in hand, standing alone near the ATM, while 3 staff members chatted in the background. She looked directly at Preston in the photo, then back at the board. This is how you treat potential. This is how you treat legacy. This is how you treat power when you think it has no title. And then she stepped back, folded her hands, and said with absolute clarity, "You don't get to carry our deposits. If you can't carry our dignity." The room hung in stunned silence, the photograph in the center of the table like a wound no one dared to touch. Then, as if on cue, voices began to rise, not in unity, but in quiet, scattered panic. "We were unaware of these incidents," one executive offered. "I believe our local branch was simply overwhelmed," said another. "We'll retrain," a third chimed in too quickly. "Update policy, revise, internal protocol." Zora raised one hand. It didn't tremble, it didn't need to. They stopped, all of them. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "You don't fix a broken foundation by repainting the walls." The room shifted. No one wanted to meet her eyes now. "I've spent the last 2 weeks inside your bank," she continued. "Not behind the glass, not in the boardroom, but in the lobbies, the consultation rooms, the waiting chairs, living what your clients live. And what I found wasn't poor customer service." She paused, let the weight sink in. It was systemic preference wrapped in smiles, backed by vague policies and administered by people who think kindness excuses inequality. The woman with the glasses, a VP of regional compliance, leaned forward, clearly nervous. "Miss Timberlake, we take these findings seriously. I'm personally committed to helping us evolve." Zora's gaze softened slightly, but her words stayed sharp. "Then don't commit with words. Commit with action." Another executive, older arms crossed tightly, finally spoke. "What action do you expect exactly? A few bad interactions don't prove the whole system is flawed." Zora turned to him, unwavering. "When the pattern is the policy, it doesn't matter how polite it sounds." She moved to the end of the table and opened another folder, thicker this time. Inside were detailed records, rejection letters, timelines, demographic stats, comparative approval rates between minority and white applicants across 5 key branches. The numbers didn't scream, they whispered. But they whispered the same word over and over: bias. Zora looked at every face around the table. This isn't about a single employee or one mistake. It's about a culture that performs for comfort and punishes difference. And I will not allow my name, my leadership, or my legacy to fund that, Silence returned. But this time it wasn't still. It cracked. One of the younger men, quiet until now, finally spoke. "Ms. Timberlake, what do you want us to do?" She didn't smile. She declared, "I want you to stop performing and start rebuilding. From the ground up." She tapped the photo again, the image of herself alone, forgotten, dismissed. "That image will never appear again, not in a bank bearing my company's name." Then she gathered her folders, her words having already rewritten the script. "As of this moment," she said, walking toward the door, "I'm freezing all regional expansion until I see change, real change, with reporting, with restructuring, with accountability." She paused at the doorframe. "And don't insult me with a press release." Then she left, and the room full of suits, titles, and polished veneers sat with the sound of truth echoing through its marble stillness. Because Zora hadn't just exposed their failure. She had reclaimed the standard. 2 days later, every branch of Monarch Financial received an internal memo marked Priority Executive Directive. It bore a single name at the top: Zora Timberlake, CEO, Timberlake Financial Group. No fluff, no pleasantries, just structure, just change. At headquarters, the leadership team reconvened in the same boardroom, but the mood had shifted. The air wasn't filled with defense, it was filled with reckoning. Zora entered with a small team of advisors, diverse in age, race, and expertise. Not just finance experts, but ethicists, community organizers, human-centered design specialists. She placed a thick binder on the table, embossed on the cover in clean gold letters: Monarch Reimagined, a people-first financial system. No one spoke as she opened it. Her voice was calm yet firm as stone. This isn't a branding fix, this is a foundational rebuild. She laid out the plan section by section. 1, blind evaluation system, loan. Officers would now assess applications using anonymized files. No names, no demographic markers, just numbers, facts, and strategy. Every decision would be tracked and audited by a third party. If bias is invisible, then so must be the barriers we remove too. Community Equity Index. Every branch would have a public-facing dashboard showing lending data, approval rates, and community reinvestment metrics by neighborhood, ethnicity, and gender, updated quarterly. Sunlight doesn't just expose, it heals. 3, leadership reformation. Half of current mid to upper management roles would be open to internal and external candidates under a new merit-based equity audited hiring process. Promotion pipelines would prioritize cultural fluency, not just performance metrics. Skill without conscience is just calculation. 4, real-time feedback loop. Customers, especially new applicants, could now rate their in-branch experiences immediately through anonymous terminals. Every poor score triggered a live review within 72 hours. No exceptions. If they can review our coffee, they can review our conduct. Restitution fund, $25 million allocated across all regions to revisit previously denied applicants from the past 5 years, especially those who had clear qualifications. These individuals would be invited back with priority review and apology, where appropriate. We can't erase history, but we can stop repeating it. 6, mandatory empathy training, no more passive videos. All staff would now undergo quarterly in-person workshops co-led by former clients and social equity facilitators. Policy changes behavior, but stories change hearts. She looked around the room. No one argued, no one dared. They knew now this wasn't a suggestion, it was a new constitution. Zora closed the binder and stood. This plan isn't designed to make Monarch look good, she said. It's built to make Monarch worthy of the communities it serves. She let that sentence settle, then added, if you can't stand behind this vision, step aside. Because I won't let anyone lead a system that silences the very people it was built to serve. And with that, she walked out, not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as the architect of a new era. One where power didn't wear a name tag. It walked in plain clothes, carrying truth, and never needed permission to lead. The email hit Preston's inbox at 6:43 a.m. Subject, internal conduct review. Immediate attendance required. Sender Office of Executive Ethics and Oversight. Timberlake Financial. He stared at it for a long moment, fingers hovering over the trackpad, as if the act of opening it might trigger something worse. But the damage had already been done. By 8 a.m., he sat alone in a glass-walled conference room, stripped of his title's protection. No nameplate, no receptionist. Just a water bottle and the faint hum of air conditioning that now sounded louder than the beat of his heart. The door opened. Zora entered, followed by 2 members of her ethics board. She didn't sit at the head of the table. She sat directly across from him. Mr. Preston Reed, one of the board members, began. You're here today to respond to a series of findings related to discriminatory treatment, procedural manipulation, and willful obstruction of qualified clients, particularly during interactions with one applicant under the alias Z. James. Preston shifted in his seat. That applicant didn't present as qualified at the time. Zora raised a hand, calm, surgical. Don't finish that sentence, she said, voice steady. It won't help you. Preston froze. Zora leaned forward, folding her hands. You had 4 chances to course correct, she said, not 1, not 2. 4, you were given documents presented with professional language financials, stronger than the average applicant in your region, and you still dismissed, redirected, and ultimately obstructed. He swallowed hard. I didn't know who she was. That's exactly the point, she replied. You only gave respect when you thought power was watching. A beat of silence. Then she added, quieter now. You see, Mr. Reed, the problem isn't that you made a mistake, it's that you were comfortable making it. One of the ethics officers slid a document toward him. This is your formal review outcome. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. You are ineligible for rehire across any Timberlake affiliated institution. Your conduct has been logged for national compliance auditing. Preston looked down, stunned. Everything he thought was untouchable gone in 5 sentences. Zora stood collecting nothing, leaving nothing. You built your career on the assumption that titles mattered more than truth. she said, but I built this system to remind people. Character always comes due. She turned to leave, but then paused in the doorway. You never saw me for who I was, she said without turning back. But I saw you. Clearly. And with that, she walked away. Preston remained frozen in his chair. The silence around him no longer powerful, just empty. And for the first time in his career, he had no one to dismiss but himself. 6 weeks later, Monarch Financial looked different, not on the surface. The buildings were still marble and glass, the logo still gold, the uniforms still sharp, but something deeper had shifted. The waiting chairs once reserved for silence now held stories young entrepreneurs from overlooked neighborhoods sitting beside retirees, getting loan consultations without being questioned about their intent. For the first time, the receptionist desk offered more than courtesy. It offered presence. A young Latina business owner named Rosa walked in with her daughter one Monday morning. She expected skepticism. She found a personal greeter who spoke her language. An older black man with a welding startup sat down to open his first business line of credit. He was asked about his vision, not just his revenue. Even the ATM, once a cold symbol of redirection, now offered to speak with a live advisor option prominently displayed. But it wasn't just about process, it was about who was in the room. Branches had new assistant managers, many promoted internally from roles that had once seemed invisible. Tellers, receptionists, even janitorial staff who had gone unnoticed for years, but now brought lived experience into leadership. Compliance reviews weren't feared anymore. They were welcomed because now they weren't hunting mistakes, they were catching potential. And in the corner of every branch was a framed plaque with 8 words etched in bold centered above every desk. Power is how you treat people without it. The quote was unsigned, but they all knew who said it. Zora watched the transformation quietly from her office high above the city, not as a queen in a tower, but as a servant, to the truth she once had to live through just to prove it existed. She didn't need applause. She didn't want her face on a poster. What she wanted was finally happening. One customer, one loan, one second chance at a time. And for the first time in years, the doors to the bank didn't just open, they welcomed. Years passed, the city changed, skyscrapers stretched higher, streets buzzed faster. But tucked between the noise and the neon was a single sunlit office on the 17th floor of a community development center. A place that didn't serve clients, but uplifted neighbors. Inside that office sat Isaiah Timberlake, now 28. Confident, calm, a quiet fire behind his eyes just like hers. He had just finished a consultation with a teenager named Malik, who dreamed of starting a mobile repair business. Malik left with more than a plan. He left with belief. Isaiah smiled, then turned to his desk. A small black and white photo sat framed near his keyboard. It was his mother, Zora. Not in a boardroom, not in a blazer. Just sitting in the living room one evening, hair tied back, hands folded around a warm mug, looking directly into the camera, as if daring the world to do better. He remembered that night he had asked her why she didn't fight back the day that man hit her. And she had said, because sometimes the most powerful answer is to keep walking forward until the world has to catch up. Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment. He understood now. She hadn't just changed the way banks worked. She had changed the way he worked, not for applause, not for titles, but because every human being deserved to be seen before they were ever measured. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. It was his assistant, Mr. Timberlake. A young woman just walked in. No appointment. She says she doesn't know how to pitch her idea, but she seems determined. Isaiah stood smiling. Then she's already halfway there. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back at the photo one last time. Thank you, Mom, he whispered. Your lesson didn't end with me. And then he opened the door just like she once did so someone else could finally walk through.